I'm honored to be joined by a good friend, fellow Brooklynite, City Controller William Thompson. Welcome to CityWide.
Thank you, Ken.
We have spent this season talking about how policy is made in New York, focusing in on think tanks, policy shops, idea entrepreneurs, if you will, that have a point of view, take an idea, and then go out and sell it. I wanted to start off by asking you, as the recipient of those efforts, what gets your attention? How does policy get made in your office?
Well, I think the things that get attention, people who, an idea that's a little different, an idea that's something that you haven't heard, something that obviously can help improve a situation or help move the city forward. All of those things, no matter what the area, no matter what the field, someone comes up, whether they send something in, whether they reach out into the office and through different people, all of those things. And I think one of the things that you want to say to people at times, everyone wants to try and reach out to me and say, here's an idea. Sometimes that works, sometimes it's the people around you, the people in policy and others who help to put some of that together. They reach out to them, it bubbles up and winds up in part of a conversation. And if it's a good idea and you think it helps move the city forward, you'll take it public. You'll work along with that person, you'll help take it public, and stay on it time and time and time again until it gets more attention or until it becomes part of the city policy.
So let's assume that one of our guests, either it's the head of the Drum Major Institute or the head of the Manhattan Institute, they've come into your office, they've got an idea for changing food stamp policy or healthcare or something like that. What's the process within your office for figuring out whether that's a good idea, a bad idea, and to what extent do constituencies and contributors play into that?
I mean, I think if you look that there are individuals from whether it's the Manhattan Institute or the Drum Major Institute, someone there, depending on, could pick the phone up, reach out to me, or come in, sit with me, or other individuals in the office. Good idea, it's going to wind up, they're going to take a look at it, they're going to go through it, they're going to present it to me. We're going to be involved and engaged in discussion at that point, and then either work with them to try and get the policy implemented. I'll reach out to city administration if it's a good idea, ask to sit down with them and advance the idea, and then try and push it forward and make sure it gets implemented. So I think it is, like I said, we've gotten ideas that have come forward from think tanks, from advocates in different ways in areas like housing, subprime crisis, other things that we're trying to move forward. There's so many different things and ideas that may come to you at times from places that people wouldn't normally expect. And then average citizens can write, can email, and someone will take a look at it. So there are a number of different avenues. There isn't, the one thing that you'd like to say to people and the average citizen, the constituent, there is an avenue for those good ideas that they have to be looked at, reviewed, and maybe advanced.
Sometimes there are policy implications, although somebody's coming forward with a particular complaint. Your office audits the operation of city agencies. I would expect that you get a fair number of tips about places you should be looking.
Yeah, we do. We get tips, and whether it is from people in government or people who have interacted with government and have run into problems. So you get those complaints or you get those ideas, audit ideas. At times, if it's something that is time sensitive, audits take a while. You'll do a quick review. It may not have the same controls that an audit does, but it has just as big an impact.
Well, let's take the audit function, because you wear several different hats. You've got sort of the chief financial officer budget piece, and we'll talk about that. You've got the investor piece on behalf of pension funds. I want to start with the audit piece, because here you are commenting on the processes and procedures that city agencies use, particularly with respect to their fiscal operations. But very often you have to make choices about whether a program is effective or not effective, also whether the program should exist or not. So I want to ask you, if you look back over the last several years of those audit functions, to what extent do you think the Bloomberg administration has not just changed the mechanics of it, but re-examine what it is that they were trying to accomplish in the first place?
Well, in some ways, I mean, the process that things go through is, in a number of ways, consistent and in some ways the same as it was years ago. Some of it isn't. So you look at things and you may have, some concerns. You look at the Department of Education. They've increased the use of no-bid contracts, of sole source contracts. You want to establish some controls on that, realizing they're doing more of that. You try and create a process at least so that the public feels reassured that the process has integrity. So you work on process. It's different than it was before. Perhaps different outcomes, but at least a different process. And you try and work on that to maintain some control and oversight while they may move forward. Right now, if you look, Department of Aging, they're talking about new contracts and trying to redo the way that they do Meals on Wheels programs. They're going to do white papers and then follow it with contracts and all this. We're going to be part of that process and part of that discussion, both in focus and procedure as opposed to just process. What are the outcomes going to be? You're not going to do you're going to do frozen meals in some ways as opposed to just a home delivered meal. What's that going to look like? What's that going to mean for senior citizens? What does that mean for the personal contact? So you start to talk about what the bottom line is, but we're going to work with them on things like process also. How's it going to look? You're narrowing the number of nonprofits that you're going to engage and you're going to contract with. What's that look? And then other things. How can we do things better? How can we do things online? We're going to have things for vendors, nonprofits, as well as those doing business with us. They can track their payments online. They can pay attention to manage their own information online through Vendex. There are a lot of things that you want to do to make things differently, speed it up, make it easier, let people get paid faster. So it's both process and content.
Have you found the Bloomberg administration receptive to outside criticism?
They may not like it. They may not, and I guess any mayor doesn't like, or any administration doesn't like outside criticism. But the one thing, the difference between perhaps a Bloomberg administration and a Giuliani administration is while neither of them liked criticism, the Bloomberg administration can take the criticism whether they like it or not and move on. And they won't hold a grudge. There isn't permanent problems in the relationship or the interaction between my office and the rest of city government. Another example also, we had done an audit on housing for homeless individuals a few years ago. We thought that there were certain situations and there were buildings that were being used that were unsafe. We broke audit protocol, reached out to make them aware of unsafe situations. And what they did was to use our audit in the long run to try and change the process and who they contracted with and how that was done to improve it. That's different than it would have been done before. So we have found them, while, as I said, no one likes to be criticized, where they believe that there's serious merit, they'll attempt to engage. And even if they don't, if they disagree, they'll try and incorporate some of the recommendations.
Well, I saw recently you did a report on vocational education, and I want you to talk a little bit about that, particularly the policy implications of it. But I think that the Department of Education's immediate reaction when you issued the report was things weren't so bad, but then a few weeks later, they did something about it. So talk a little bit about that report.
Yeah, no, I think, looking at career and technical education, vocational schools, and we focused on a number of them, but definitely the ones run by the Department of Education, and how resources hadn't been going there. They weren't up to date. And we're talking about looking, I think the biggest step in the report was almost an acknowledgement to some extent, or at least somebody saying, everybody may not go to college, but you can have a great life. You can make a good living. You can be part of the middle class in being a plumber, an electrician, an auto mechanic. There are so many things out there where you will do well if you have the right training. And then the other part of it that we showed is those in career and technical education in those schools, they go to college in higher percentages than other students do, which was it runs counter to what you would normally think. But perhaps now that they have that foundation, or now that they have confidence in a specific area, they're more willing to take risk in other areas. But we pointed out how the principals had talked about a concern about resources, lack of focus in the number of personnel at the Department of Education, number of permanent people had been reduced. So we made certain recommendations of how these could be strengthened, how we can work to churn out young people for jobs.
So what happened?
Well, the Department of Education, as you pointed out, kind of indicated, well, it wasn't as bad as the Comptroller indicated. It's much better. I'm sitting at the State of the City, and the mayor makes it, as I said, no one really acknowledged that we were right. The mayor comes out with the State of the City, and there's a commission that he's naming with former Mayor Dinkins chairing it to look at career and technical education and how to make major improvements, because it is a big area and it needs to be a lot of improvement. And I sat there and was like, that was our idea. Now, you always don't need, recognition of the fact that you had a good idea. The fact that we were able to put it forward, and the fact that, that the mayor has taken notice of it and they're going to move to make improvements, I thought was valuable. So we were proud of it. I was sitting next to Mayor Dinkins at the State of the City and said, we have lots of information on this, including a report from 3 months ago or 2 months ago. I'll get it all to your office. And honestly, we're going to work to be helpful in this because we'd like to see the situation improved.
You are also the chief budget officer for the city. Mm-hmm. You have to certify the revenue projections. The turmoil on Wall Street must be pretty aggravating at this stage.
Well, it is distressing from a number of levels. First, from what it is doing to the nation's economy, what it is doing to the city's economy, what it is doing to our pension funds and the value of our pension funds. All of these things are tied together. So Wall Street sliding, we are very dependent on Wall Street. Wall Street is 10% of our employees, at least the financial sector, 10% of the employees in New York City who generate 30% of the revenue. Huge economic engine for New York City. Right now, with them in flux and the problems and so many of our financial institutions having to take major write-downs, we expect, you're starting to see that slow down in the city's economy. The last few years, we have showed, record booms in our budget, record surpluses. Three of those, I point out, it's almost like a three-legged stool. Wall Street, tourism, and real estate. Those three things, the rest of the economy has been doing well, but those three things have been driving the city's economy. We're experiencing stress in two of those three right now, real estate and Wall Street. And one hopes that, what has helped, obviously what has helped to drive tourism is a weak dollar. So right now it is a major concern. When we hit bottom, I don't think anybody knows right now what's going to happen in Washington with an economic stimulus package. It needs to happen quickly. Are we going to go into a recession or not? So there are so many factors out there right now that you have to juggle. I asked, it's funny, I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with someone from Wall Street, a very important individual, and said, when does this end? When do we hit bottom? And he looked at me, was blunt, and said, who knows? I wasn't reassuring, but at the same point, I think it indicates these days that no one's exactly sure what we're going through.
We're going to continue with this conversation with City Controller Bill Thompson right after this.
I helped build it.
I helped build it too.
We helped rebuild them. And now one's ours.
We helped build it, and it's almost done.
Women helped build it.
Rosa and I helped build it too. Through 30 years and 200,000 houses, Habitat for Humanity has been building homes and lives in America and around the world.
Habitat for Humanity. Support the work in your community. Visit habitat.org.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with New York City Controller Bill Thompson. We were talking about the potential for recession, the turmoil on Wall Street. I want to focus in on a couple of things that have direct implications for you as the Chief Investment Officer for the city and also as an elected official in New York. And that is the subprime mortgage crisis, the prospect of financial institutions in which the city has invested suffering losses and reducing their market value, the implications for pensions, but also the implications this has for ordinary New Yorkers who are struggling for home ownership in the city. So could you talk a little bit about your take on what's going on and also some of the things your office has been doing?
Okay. I mean, the subprime crisis obviously had a huge impact on Wall Street and the stock market. The market has, fallen almost 2,000 points on the Dow, at least, in a very short period of time, bouncing back a little bit, but still experiencing real stress. That has real meaning to, the value of our stock portfolio. At least 50 to 60% of our portfolio is invested in stocks across the board, domestic and international, but still, that decline has a real impact on the value. If we underperform our 8% and that is, our assumption rate. If we underperform 8%, taxpayers make up the shortfall in that, and I think that's something that we're concerned about. Number one, how long will this continue? We probably ended the end of last year in a good place, at least as far as 8%. What will it mean for the long run? That's number one. Number two, when it comes to the subprime crisis, some of the companies that we've done business with, we had stock in and watched the value fall dramatically. Companies like CountryWide. Well, we're suing CountryWide right now, basically for securities fraud. The representations that they had made over a period of time, as a matter of fact, the state comptroller and our pension funds here in the city and myself, we're leading the charge. We're the lead plaintiffs in that. But we're looking at saying in value and some of the misrepresentations, we believe we've lost in excess of $100 million. Just because of the things that they had said and indicated they were doing and what they've done in reality.
And things that you couldn't have known that they were misleading about?
I mean, as I said, if you look and match up the representations, the things that they've done in conference calls and their written material and everything that they said in the print, and then the things that they did in actual practices as far as their lending practices that were fraudulent or weren't as laid out. I think a lot of that, we're looking at some companies right now, not all of them, but those that we feel have really misrepresented individuals across the board, as well as, members of our pension fund and our holdings. But what it means, what this whole subprime crisis means, I try and say to people, they're the human faces. In New York City, foreclosures, and this isn't other places in the country that have experienced huge things. New York City, 2 years ago we had 7,000 foreclosures in New York City. The end of last year, the end of 2007, 15,000 foreclosures, more than doubled. And if you look at it, so many people, a lot of it in the beginning was limited to African American, Latino communities, Central Brooklyn, Southeast Queens, and so many others. It is growing past, and I'm hearing about it in Staten Island, other parts of Brooklyn, and around the city right now. It's a growing situation of mortgage foreclosures. Each one of those numbers, for each one of those 15,000 that you talk about, that's a person or a family or someone who believed in the American dream, who had a piece of it, and now it's being taken away from them.
So what can the city do about that?
Well, what we're trying to do, and what we've been doing since the end of April, is we've put in place what we call a mortgage foreclosure helpline, a place that people can go and call. We have trained staff there to take those phone calls. They're able to work along with people, put together packages, find out where the problems are. We have outside nonprofit partners that have been approved by HUD. We're working along with them. We turn the package over to them. We stay on top of it, working together. The goal is to keep people in their homes and keep them out of foreclosure. Some of it's working with financial institutions to go back and refinance or change terms, be able to help people stay in their homes. As amazing as it sounds, we haven't gotten a lot of attention, and we've tried to get things out there, worked through the churches and other places over the months and organized labor. Well, we probably have received by now at least 2,400 phone calls from people since the end of April. And we have over 800 active cases right now, just trying to keep people in their homes and out of foreclosure. So it has a very real human face. I was at a forum a couple of weeks ago at a church, and there were at least a half a dozen people there who were talking, what do I do now? I'm having problems. They were receiving some help. Where do we go? Who can help us? How can I save my home and keep my family there? It's heartbreaking when you understand, as I said, they're not just statistics. Those are people. So, our helpline has been able to assist people. Others are coming to the table right now with different ideas. City Council and the mayor put some money in something to be able to help in counseling. All of this is welcome right now because this is a huge crisis.
Is the city prepared for a recession? Are the systems in place to help the elected officials make the right choices about the budget?
I'd say we're better prepared now than ever before. We've had some very good years. After coming off of some disastrous years in 2002 and 2003, we've turned the corner. We've had record surpluses. I think that right now there's money. They've done things to be able to prepay debt, to be able to bring down our bills and expenses for next year, to put us in a good position with some belt tightening, during this fiscal year and the next fiscal year. 2.5% reduction now to the end of June, 5% starting July 1st. All of those things will help move us forward in a way that the public won't be impacted severely. I mean, I think and we all remember when budgets turn in a downward fashion, all of a sudden we look and you talk about reducing services or increasing taxes. We don't have to do that right now. Smart moves have been made in the last couple of years to insulate us a bit against this. It's going to be what happens, I believe. The biggest concern is if the economy continues to spiral down or stay flat. When we get into the middle of 2009 and we start the budget year in July of 2009, that's a year that I'm extremely concerned about. And
a mayoral election year where much of the city council will be leaving, as well as many other positions, including yourself, will be term limited.
That's the thing that has everybody concerned, is not the next fiscal year coming up, but the one after that. And if things don't turn around, if the economy doesn't rebound, I think we're in a bit of trouble then.
So I want to take a step back for a second and ask you this. You're in your mid-50s. You grew up in Bed-Stuy. You have seen a lot of changes in your neighborhood, in Brooklyn, in the city in general. What lessons from growing up in the 50s and 60s, growing up professionally in the 70s and 80s, what do you take out of that experience into the job that you have now?
Sense of balance. You can see where some of the mistakes that were made in the 60s and 70s and the impact it had on communities. The flight of when city services were reduced, how businesses left, how there was no place to shop in my neighborhood, or the places that were there were limited, and the services and quality of things were poor. I think, we looked at New York City in the 60s and just kind of growing up and what was there. And then as we got, the biggest thing, that's helped now, the fiscal crisis in the mid-70s, the steps that were made then almost destroyed New York City. And I think, as we went to a fiscal crisis in 2002 and 2003, the one thing I was able to say, don't destroy city services. We have to maintain quality of life. We don't want to run people out of the neighborhoods. And we've been able to maintain that balance. And because of it, city is probably stronger than ever before. I mean, I point out, we're looking, some things are cyclical, but the city continues to grow and thrive. And, there isn't, if you go back in the 60s and 50s, or in the 60s definitely, there were communities that people would have never thought of living in. And right now, there isn't a community in the city of New York that's off limits. People right now, given improving the quality of life and so many other things, are saying, hey, I can live, as I said, I've seen a huge influx in Bed-Stuy these days. You are concerned about what it means for things like affordable housing for working men and women in New York City in the middle class. At the same point, there's an influx in almost every neighborhood, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Bushwick, almost every place in Queens, the South Bronx, neighborhoods across the city of New York. Those are kind of some of the lessons that you look at the past, what's going to bring people here and keep them here and make this a city that they want to stay in. And you look at how you grew up and incorporate all that.
My thanks to William C. Thompson, Jr., New York City's Comptroller.
Thank you, Ken.
I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us on this edition of CityWide.